As we mark Baisakhi, it's a good moment to look at one of the tallest figures of Punjabi literature, Nanak Singh, whose book has just been translated. One of his many books, I should say, Amb Navdeep has just been translated by his grandson, veteran diplomat Navdeep Suri, into English for all of us to read, think about, debate, and reflect on. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story, and I want to welcome to the program Ambassador Navdeep Suri. We were just talking about the fact that your grandfather has not just been one of the most legendary writers of Punjabi literature, one of its most iconic voices, one of his most prolific voices, but some would argue also, in a way, a prophetic voice. Because when I look at A Game of Fire, which is the English name for Agdekhed, it almost reads as a parable for all times, not just for the time that it was written in, which was, of course, the fault lines of partition, the ruptures, the social, religious, political ruptures of the time. Before we come to actually the book, tell our audience a little bit about Nanak Singh, what all he witnessed. He was a Jallianwala Bagh survivor. On Baisakhi, it's very important to talk about him and his legacy.
Thank you, Barkha. A pleasure to be back on your show. My grandfather Nanak Singh was quite a remarkable individual. He was born in the Jhelum district in what is now Pakistan, in a very ordinary family struggling to make ends meet. He got orphaned by the time he was 10, and he was the eldest surviving son, so he had to take on the responsibility for the family. And so he got no formal education beyond the fourth grade.
And yet he wrote 59 books.
And yet he wrote 59 books, 38 novels, and a whole oeuvre of theater and short stories, and even translations that he did later in his life. So it's really a natural storyteller, a genius, and I think it's that sensibility of the writer that enables him to look ahead, peer through the future for us, and we saw it when he wrote Khuni Vaisakhi, the long poem after surviving the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And right in the very first page, which is an invocation to Guru Gobind Singh, he's saying, "Oh my Guru, give me the strength that I can tell the story of our martyrs so that future generations remember it." So it's almost like a 22-year-old is writing with an eye on posterity.
It's extraordinary, and I want to talk about so many things, but let's first pick up A Game of Fire, your English translation of your grandfather's work that has been described by many to be a cautionary tale of the times, a tale about partition, but a tale that could be applicable to our country at any point, because it talks about the ideal of unity. There's a unity council at the heart of this tale. It talks about how religious rupture can tear apart, pull people apart, but also about what brings people together, what is worth preserving. And it also talks about playing with fire, the perils of playing with fire, hence Agdekhed, Game of Fire.
Yeah, so, this is really, to my mind, these two novels that my grandfather wrote back to back, Khoon de Sohle, which I translated as Hymns in Blood, and its sequel, Agdekhed, which is A Game of Fire, are, to my mind, objectively one of the most remarkable accounts of the partition, written by somebody sitting in Amritsar in 1947, witnessing and talking to both the flood of refugees of Hindus and Sikhs who were coming across to Amritsar, which was really their first safe haven upon being uprooted, and the situation in Amritsar itself. Now, growing up, many of us had heard a partition story, which was from our friends and families and relatives who had been uprooted. And the story that we, at least most often heard, was the story of the terrible violence inflicted by the Muslim League, by the Muslim mobs on Hindu and Sikh communities that had been living harmoniously for generations across the length and breadth of what is now Pakistan. That part was captured in Hymns in Blood. In this one, my grandfather forces us to face up to the other partition story. And when I was doing some research for this book and the context and the period and Amritsar in 1947, I was personally surprised that according to the 1941 census, Amritsar had 46% Muslim population. I, born in 1959, grew up in Amritsar in the 60s and 70s and early 80s in a city which had none or virtually none. So when we talk about contemporary situations, when we talk about ethnic cleansing, what's happening today in Gaza, when we talk about Bosnia or anything, we saw that happen here in Amritsar. And I think that's the cautionary message, that how quickly you can move from a Khuni Vaisakhi or a Vaisakhi in 1919, when the three communities, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs of Amritsar, jointly are fighting against British rule, to 28 years later in 1947, when they are at each other's throats. How does this happen? What is the othering that enables it, that you suddenly see the other person as subhuman, and you lose your own humanity in the process?
Yeah. And, I was just thinking when you were speaking that Punjab is still one of those states where we have done these stories. You hear of stories in villages where, Malerkotla, for example, where people will come together to help rebuild a mosque. The Sikhs will come and they will be at the forefront of rebuilding the mosque. And that is how things should be, this kind of celebration of each other's faith and places of worship. But there is also the flip side. There is the bitterness of partition. There is the cynicism of partition. There is the mass violence that takes place, losses that occur in all communities, Hindu, Sikh, and Muslims at the time of partition, and how that shapes a mindset. It can shape your mindset in two ways. It can make you wary of the othering, which is clearly what happened to Nanak Singh, your grandfather, or it can entrench your biases for all times to come. And the book looks at the story of one family. It's a fictionalized account of a very real fault line. And what happens when the family discovers that one of their family members whom they did not know actually turns out to be Muslim?
Yeah, and I think that's his way of sending his message. You see, Nanak Singh as an author didn't see himself just as a novelist. He wanted to consciously tailor himself on the lines of Munshi Premchand and be a social reformer through his books. And he writes about this in his autobiography, that how he gets his characters, whether it is Krishna in this book or Satnam through his actions, give us a message that he wants us to receive. And so you hear in this very powerful sort of impassioned speech by Krishna as she's trying to ward off a group of hot-headed young Sikhs and who want to create an arson attack against Muslim neighborhoods in Amritsar. You see his own views come through so powerfully, and he says this right in the foreword, and then he goes on to say it multiple times. He says, "Manas ki jab sab ek pehchan bo." We are all one creed of humanity, and that's his underlying really faith. When we were setting up a Nanak Singh Center at the Guru Nanak Dev University Library a couple of years back, we put a handwritten phrase of his which really appealed to me, and it's in his own handwriting, which we put up over there. It says, "Nanak Singh, janam to Punjabi, karam to Bharti, te taram to Manav Puji hai." Nanak Singh is a Punjabi by birth, an Indian by choice, and a humanist by creed. That's his faith. And he keeps saying this again and again, and he wants us to internalize through the characters that for him, he's a devout Sikh, but his religion is a personal matter. humanity is universal, and when there's a conflict, humanity should trump your religion. That's his faith, and that's the message that he wants us to take away.
When you were translating it from the book from Punjabi to English, what struck you as particularly contemporary? You know, when you closed your eyes and you said, "Oh my God, ये तो आज की कहानी हो सकती है."
Well, there's a section where he doesn't pull any punches. He says that when I look at what's happening, the RSS and Arya Samaj, the Akalis, and the Muslim League and the Anjuman are equally responsible for what's happening. When I see what's going on today, I see political leaders fanning the flames of communal passions. I see religious leaders jumping into the fray to do the same. And he has a very strong warning about the role that media plays in amplifying and exaggerating the stories. And there's this very vivid passage about how the Urdu press in Lahore is sort of throwing up stories about mosques being destroyed in Amritsar. And then soon you have the same stories about gurdwaras being destroyed and so on. And how many of these fake news in today's terms are adding to the conflagration and getting people more and more angry. It's not that there's not enough bad stuff going on in any case. There's enough violence. There's enough things happening in this milieu. But he talks about three actors that we should be wary of in a situation like this, and really forces us to think about their role: the political leaders, the religious leaders, and the media. Each one having its own agenda. And I think that's today as it was in 1947. And these two books are, I think, remarkable because they were published in 1948. So they are really sort of raw, current, contemporaneous accounts of what he was seeing.
No, I was just saying that's uncanny because this is, calling out fake news before it was even a nomenclature. And the fact that, we see every day the media has now become an instrument in some ways, large sections of it. There are always notable exceptions. A large section of media has become instrument of polarization, of division, instead of bringing people together. I want you to share some of the more sort of, one or two of the passages, if you can. We debate freedom. We debate where does someone's freedom end. We talk about free speech. We talk about, today the media would sometimes hide behind the free speech debate to justify some of the more poisonous things that are said. What do you think Nanak Singh would have wanted today's India to know before you share that passage? What do you think Nanak Singh would have wanted his Bharat to be wary of today?
I think he would have wanted us to be very mindful of the use of religion as a tool in the hands of whether it's religious leaders or politicians. He wants us to recognize that there are these dangers lurking. And once you light the fires of communal hatred, that conflagration can consume you as well. You may not be in a position to put out. It's kind of the classic case of creating a Frankenstein and not being able to then control the monster that you've unleashed, and it comes to bite you. So I think he is, and he just wants us to, when he says, there's a beautiful little passage which is semi-autobiographical, where he's telling us the trauma that he faced when he saw the violence around him in 1947. He went into complete depression, and then he turned to the scriptures to kind of find solace once again and get his own sort of composure back. And there's a very short passage that he reads, which is kind of emblematic of his philosophy. He says, "एक नूर से सब जग उपजया, कौन पले कौन मंदे, Kabir's message, from one light, the entire universe was created. How can some be good and some be bad? And he picks up these scriptures and starts reading from there. And he says he read the scriptures for another 2 hours before gently placing the gutka on the table. Sorry, I think there's another one that I've missed out.
Yeah, no problem. Find it.
Yeah. He read the hymns for half an hour or a bit longer with full concentration, his mind alert and curious as he soaked in the deeper message of the text. He read the sections penned by the first Guru, then of the fifth Guru, before moving on to the verses written by Sant Kabir and Baba Farid, and the Savaiyas composed by the 10th Guru. As he absorbed the simplicity and essence of the message, the cobwebs that had clouded his vision began to dissipate. He felt a new sensation permeate his body, a kind of bliss that he had never experienced. A new picture was being framed in the window of his mind, one in which he could see Guru Nanak, Prophet Muhammad, Lord Ram and Krishna, Jesus Christ, Kabir, Farid, and Guru Gobind Singh all sitting together in one harmonious group. It was hard to make out who among that group was a Hindu, who was a Sikh, and who was a Muslim. Each face bore a profoundly spiritual expression. Each glowed with the same halo. That's the message he wants us to take, right, Barkha? And you look at those old pictures, whether of Christianity or Islam, or Sikhism or Hinduism, and there is that sense that you get.
And what strikes me also is that, there's an entire generation that I think came after your grandfather's generation, which equated being progressive with being non-religious. Now, of course, how religious you are, how you interpret religion is a personal choice, but he was clearly devoutly Sikh. His Sikh identity meant something to him. He's invoking the gurus when he's talking about amity. And I find that so relevant for today, because today people who are trying to take on religious orthodoxy don't have a language of religion. So many people have grown up without any cultural rootedness, without any, very westernized idea, as it were, of secularism. So talk a little bit about that. Clearly, he was the antithesis of that.
He was, and I think he wants us to go deeper into the underlying message of what the gurus were saying, of spirituality, of the oneness of mankind. That's what he wants us to take away, not our superficial understandings based on half a dozen slogans and the bigotry that it might provoke. Why does he want us to take home the message of Kudrat ke sab bande, ek noor se sab jag upjaya, kaun pale kaun mande? That's your antidote against the othering of other communities, right? That we are all the same creed of humanity. And it's such a robust secularism. And Barkha, I think what is so important, I think, is that he is saying this in 1948, when passions were so inflamed, when it was almost anathema to say something like this about other faiths. There's a very visual, very graphic passage in the early part of the book where he hears the sounds of a mob assembling. He hears the shouting and he thinks, oh my God, this is now the Muslims gathering to target a Sikh neighborhood after their neighborhood was targeted in arson attacks last night. And he goes there and he says, instead of seeing a sea of Muslim skullcaps, he sees a row of black turbans. And these, instead of hearing slogans of Ya Allah, Ya Hussein, he's hearing Bole Sonehal. And this is a Sikh mob on the rampage, targeting every Muslim establishment and even targeting Muslim homes and killing women and children. And this idealistic young man, Satnam, desperately goes there and shouts that, hey, Khalsa ji, stop. Which religion, which guru has taught you this, that you should raise your arms against an unarmed person? And that's why he really wants us to understand the message of what is behind every religion. And that, I think, holds true for Islam, it holds true for Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism.
Yeah.
Today, and I keep going back because of my sort of experience with the Middle East. Half the stuff that you are tragically witnessing in Gaza wouldn't be happening if you had a better empathy towards others.
And at some other point in history, the Jews would have said that for themselves. And that is the point, right? Today, what's happening in Gaza is so disturbing. Before that, the Holocaust was so disturbing. And I'm just speaking to the sort of
And what happened
universal.
on October 7 was so disturbing, right?
Absolutely.
All of it. But I think the contemporary relevance of books like these is that they look at your underlying ills or causes and what triggers these passions.
I want you to speak a little bit about why reading this today reminded you so much of Gaza.
So, Barkha, I'll tell you why Gaza resonates with me so much. Not just because I learned Arabic and spent 12 years of my life in the region, but when you look at the history, the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the UN Partition Plan on Palestine in 1947, a land claimed by two people, both feel that they have a legitimate claim on it. And what you've seen since then, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, but particularly in Gaza in the last 20 years or so, is this relentless cycle of violence, counter-violence, revenge, retribution. A couple of years back when you had the last round of violence in Gaza in 2021, I wrote a longish piece which said, until next time, because you could also almost see that the next time is going to come around very soon. And sure enough, it did in October 23. And then when I was translating this Game of Fire, and I was reading this very powerful passage about this young girl, Krishna, addressing this group of hot-headed 12 young men who are out to commit arson against 5 Muslim neighborhoods and literally burn them down to the ground. And she makes a very impassioned plea to them, saying, yes, I know you are angry. Yes, I know that the innocent Hindus and Sikhs killed by Muslims in Potohar was wrong. But what will you achieve by this violence, particularly against the innocent women and children who will die? And there's this really graphic reference that's there about, she says, think of those little kids whose feet haven't even felt the clay and the ground of our gullies and mohallas. And when I was translating that, it took me to the many images that we've seen from the horrors of Gaza, all those disembodied children, all of those scenes of carnage. And it set me thinking that this is perhaps why these books are called classics, because they are as relevant today as they were 75 years ago, and because of the universality, because you can almost extrapolate what Nanak Singh is saying about Punjab, about Amritsar in 1947, and take it to Gaza in 2023-24, or in Sudan, or in any of the numerous conflict spots that you see around the world.
Well, a lot to think about there. But meanwhile, from Gaza back to Baisakhi, this is a moment when we are commemorating, we are marking Baisakhi in our calendars. And of course, Ambassador, your grandfather was a Jallianwala Bagh survivor, not just a witness, but an actual survivor. And Kuni Baisakhi, one of his powerful previous works, in some ways is a piece of work that we should remember today. And I'm going to ask you to leave us with words from his writings that capture this moment, not just in a calendar, but as we've been saying, works that capture in so many different ways the contemporary realities of our times, our hopes, our fears, our celebrations, and our sorrows.
So my grandfather was in this unusual situation on Vaisakhi Day in 1919. He was at Jallianwala Bagh. He witnessed the massacre, was fortunate to survive it, and wrote this incredible poem called Kuni Vaisakhi. And then 28 years later, here he is again in Amritsar witnessing the horrors of the partition. And he has this beautiful passage in the book which says, It is said that history has a way of repeating itself. And that's what Amritsar seemed to be doing on this Baisakhi after 28 years. Once again, innocent people were being killed in the city. Once again, the city was being charred by angry fires. But look a little deeper, and you would see that the two situations are like chalk and cheese. 28 years ago, it was the British Empire that had decided to drive the city's Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs into a cauldron. It was the blood of the three communities that had mingled to drench the hallowed earth of Jallianwala Bagh and give its soil a crimson hue. It was the sight of the three communities sharing the same glass of water that had lifted the patriotic spirits of the nation. Today, those events seem like a tale from the distant past. The human blood flowing in our streets today is from a dagger that our own hand has plunged into our very own bosom. 28 years ago, the three communities had acted in unison to set on fire buildings that were a symbol of imperial power. Today, we are setting each other's homes on fire and treating the macabre scenes as entertainment. Yes, we heard slogans being shouted then, and we hear them being shouted now. But what a difference. These eyes, which had once seen Muslims saying Ram Ram and Hindus chanting Ya Hussein, today the same eyes have to be the unfortunate witness of our people shouting, kill them and destroy them, as mobs roam the street to spill the blood of their neighbors. That same Vaisakhi, that Khuni Vaisakhi, has once again descended on our city like an evil spirit. Once again, there's a curfew and the bazaars are shut. But on that day, we had seen the patriotic fervor of our people as they defied the curfew to gather in Jallianwala Bagh and demand an end to the rule of the Angrez. Today, our people have donned the mantle of Satan himself, thirsting for the blood of their neighbors as they step into the streets.
Namaskar and hello everyone. Welcome to a ride through the heart and the soul of India.
Desire us. But here's the thing about women and flirting. That every
क्योंकि जब इलेक्शन सीजन आता है तो कौन जीता, कौन हारा, कौन आगे, कौन पीछे, ये बातचीत तो होती ही रहती है. But it's also a time for travel and meeting people and getting to know your own country better. So, welcome to the dhabas of democracy, where every bite tells a story, where every conversation will spice up your day. Experience the masala, the flavor, the swad of this election with us as we take a unique road trip from the south to the north of India, traveling thousands of kilometers to bring you the flavor of this election.
इलेक्शन सर पर है, वोटर अपना मन बना रहे हैं. ऐसे में आपको चाहिए सही फैक्ट, सही ज्ञान, सही नॉलेज. इसी कड़ी में मोजो स्टोरी लेकर आ रहा है एक खास कार्यक्रम, बैलेट की बात. मैं हूं पॉलिटिकल रिसर्चर कार्तिकेय बत्रा और मैं चाहता हूं आपके दिन के केवल 2 मिनट. कैंडिडेट्स, पार्टीज, अलायंसेस, इश्यूज, इन सब पर होगी बात. और होगा रोज आपका एक छोटा सा पॉलिटिकल टेस्ट. स्पेशल प्राइजेस फॉर दोज हु आर द बेस्ट. तो बैलेट की बात, कट द नॉइज, सिर्फ सच और फैक्ट की वॉइस.